All right, and for this week, this video is on the bubble sort trainer. I'm going to dive into the hierarchy of game objects right here. So as you open it up, we have the bubble sort level, and we go down to another level deeper. We're moving from macro to micro through the hierarchy of levels of responsibility and levels of interaction. Here we have the table that we're on. Let me just press the F key, zoom up on it in the scene view. This whole big table, which, it's just very basic geometry. This is low fidelity prototyping. We have the container manager. This is where the containers get spawned. Underneath here, we have all the containers that I'll ever need. They're turned off. They're grayed out, but if I turn them on, they're all just sitting there. And they are prefabs, which I'm going to have to go over the prefabs later, but I'm just kind of showing you the structure right now. These are the reference locations for the containers. I think the reason that there's stuff underneath it is that I was building out what I thought a container would look like, and I was just moving around, and I was still building out the idea of what I need to have a container or an element in a list and what's going to be within it. But ultimately, they're spaced out and sized, and so I think the contents underneath them aren't as important as the locations that they are. But as I dig through the script, I'll make sure that actually, as I look through them, it looks like what they are. So when there's 5 containers, this is what the 5 container layout looks like. Yep. All right. So this is what's like returning back to your code and remembering what's happening. So I had planned out the setup. So I know that I wanted lists of potentially from 2 elements up to 8. And this is what the spacing and the would look like and the objects would look like. So I kept them turned off and just hidden in another group as reference when I went in to actually build this container manager. But in any case, this is the tray. There's that blue object here. It's got some UI elements up here. Down at the bottom here, we have a little bit right here. Notice it doesn't integrate this left click. Remember, this was just like a little instructions for WebGL, and it's kind of built into WebGL user. But the tray also has these buttons here. This lever was coming from the previous level. I thought I might use it. I didn't end up using it, so I just turned it off because I didn't delete it. I thought maybe I might end up using it. But let me so if we dive into the tray, into like the lowest level, the most micro level here, we have our instruction panel. We got 2 panels here, each one having a text element. But both of them together is this back part. And we have the controls up here. And if I open this up, we just have kind of a panel, which is just kind of a semi-transparent image. It just kind of made the tray look more interesting and kind of frame stuff up. And we have this control group here, which has the buttons and the controls. So the button swap. This little thing in the middle here that shows the actual element and its number. So there's like a list of numbers will grow in this area. Here's the next button. This stuff I ended up not using and eventually turning off, but I was using it previously. And we have the current steps in the current task that they're trying to do and the goal that they're trying to reach. And so now that I kind of moved through the nesting of objects, the hierarchy of objects, and the mentality was that in hierarchies you go down from parent to child, and the benefit of that is not only can they be aware of each other, but it's very easy for parents objects to manipulate children objects when you need to, but it also like kind of frames the logic of what's happening here. So we kind of have the level manager at the top, this type of table manager, the container manager, the tray manager, and the tray contains the user interface. The tray is like the heavily interactive element. So as I move through them, we can look on the right in the inspector and see what type of scripts that are happening here. So we have the level script, the table script, the container manager. And as I'm moving through them, this is what you can just double click on the scripts and open them in Visual Studio. But this is what they look like in Visual Studio. And as I'm going through them, I'm going to, let's see, I don't need the camera, mouse click. I'm not sure if I'm using these UI elements right now. So I'm just going to close these. I'm not sure if I'm using the scene man. No, that's from the prototype, the three levels we're moving through. What I want is I want the bubble sort level, and then I have this table manager. So I'm going to open this up. What I like to do in my scripts in Visual Studio is hopefully if I have some type of hierarchy of responsibility with my scripts, I'll keep them from left to right. So kind of moving from macro to micro along the tabs at the top. It just helps me keep in order to the scripts. So it looks like this container manager, I'll need that. I have some type of tray script or tray manager. Let's see, it doesn't look like there's any scripts in here. That's good. There's UI controls. Let's move that there. There's probably it's probably something on the buttons. Yeah, button pushable. All right. And that's probably it. Let me see if there's anything on any of these containers. Probably not. No, because they're all controlled by the manager. All right. So I'm just gonna shrink the hierarchy down so it's a little bit more easier to look at. And let's look at the highest level. Let's look at what the biggest responsibility in this scene is doing. So bubble sort level. Our level manager. So note that when you have these manager scripts, there's only like one of each, or what's known as a singleton. I don't have the code in this to make it like a proper singleton, but singletons are used a lot in coding. It's what's known as a design pattern. Any type of pattern has been like identified over the years as like a really useful way to organize your code in certain architecture, certain design patterns, and object-oriented programming. In this case, managers, like they have one core idea, one core responsibility, and there's only one of them. So in this case, the bubble sort level manager, this script is in charge of just organizing, being aware of, manipulating, controlling anything to keep the macro aspects of the level in check. And so we went over like using different namespaces, and that usually there's one big class, and you instantiate objects. The class the blueprint. The objects are like the function in code or copies of it. And there's only one copy. There's only one object of bubble sort level, and I just placed it on this game object. So it's inheriting from mono behavior, so it can be attached as a component on a game object, which it is. So over here, we have some publicly exposed variables. So we have a private list of listeners called listeners, lowercase listeners. And whenever you make a list, is just a style. Say, so you have your standard data types like floats, ints, bools, strings. You have data types that are like very particular to Unity, or in like vector threes, which are just three floats, colors, game objects, transforms, what have you. Now, sometimes it's really easy to make collections of these types of objects to help you sort through them, and organize them and just keep things managed and maintained as all the complexity of your software grows. So there's things called arrays, lists, and for this is all you need to be aware of. But there's other stuff called dictionaries, also known as like hash maps, tree structures, graphs, stacks, queues, linked lists. Just be aware of these terms, and that as you take more advanced CS classes, you might get exposed to them, and they're very useful to help you control the chaos as the complexity of your code grows. In this case, I'm using a list. So think of it as like a linear collection of whatever objects you want. In this case, they're going to be of type listener. This is my own script. Let me open it. So I just went to go to definition, and it opened it for me. It's in my project. I was just lazy. I just there's a shortcut to open it in Visual Studio. And the reason I made this listener class is that I have a lot. If I click through here, notice bubble sort table is inheriting from listener, not mono behavior. Container manager is inheriting from listener. The tray is inheriting from listener. The UI controls are inheriting. Even the button is a listener. So in this case, and notice that a listener class is just of type mono behavior. So it's just a basic mono behavior script that has like start, update, and can be attached as a component. But since the level manager is really kind of controlling and managing all this information about what's happening in the level, I want everyone to be listening so that they know, as we're moving through all these different parts of the level, they know how to change themselves, how to update their own variables, their own states. And yes, I could have made the bubble sort level. I could have made a whole bunch of variables, like a variable of type bubble sort table, and say this is the bubble sort table I'm referring to, which happens to be here. And this is the container manager. So when the bubble sort level moves through all these stages of the level, it says, hey, bubble sort table, I want you to do this. Container manager, I want you to do that. Tray, I want you to do this. And I could most definitely have done that. It's just this listener is just another type of these patterns or design ways to design your code that makes things a little easier for me. So all you have to know is all this stuff is inheriting from listener, and it's an abstract class. And now I know I'm introducing some more intermediate or complicated ideas, and it's okay to just like listen and absorb, and you'll make stuff for you make use of this stuff later on in your learning career. But this is an abstract class, meaning it doesn't actually exist. You can't make objects from it, but other classes will inherit it and will make use of it. It's like a pattern. So it's like a template. It's like a blueprint of a blueprint. It's like everything that inherits from listener class must make use of this, whatever I put into this class. So it's saying that everything that inherits from listener will have methods called like set listener state, that button has been pushed, that a container has been populated or depopulated, that the buttons have been reset, that a task was unsuccessful or successful. And on awake, remember all the everything that inherits from mono behavior has access to a start method, an awake method, an update method, and can be attached as a component. So on awake, when the script enables, it becomes active. In this scenario, it only becomes active once, but stuff could be enabled and disabled multiple times, and sometimes you want to put stuff in awake. But in this case, awake is only called once, but it says if this variable is null, It doesn't point to anything. It doesn't know what the bubble sort level is. This object from here, which gets instantiated up here. It's saying that if this is null, if this variable is pointing at nothing, then go out and set it to this. So level equals this. So just notice that this if statement doesn't have any curly brackets. Yeah, when you do a one-line statement, you don't need curly brackets. It's kind of poor convention, though. You should really have brackets, but whatever. It's just a make less lines. Excuse me. I just had a hiccup. So it's saying if level is null, go out and find the game object that has a tag on it called game controller, and go get the component on it called bubble sort level. So if any of these that are inheriting from from listener, for example, table, bubble sort table, when you become awake, when this level starts and the script awakens, or this object, this instance of the script, and your level variable is empty, is null, go out and find the game object that's tagged with game controller. I purposely, there's only one, and go down through its list of components and go find the bubble sort level. So they all are aware of where level is. So they're all listening and aware. That's why they're listeners. They are aware of the master controller. Like it's like this script is controlling the whole level, right? And what it does eventually is it's able to call these methods out. Everybody who's listening to me, to the level manager, when I decide that a button has been pushed, I will tell everyone a button's pushed. When I decide that a container's populated, or I wish to populate a container, what is really happening, or I wish to depopulate a container, do so. I don't care who's responsible because I'm just sending this out to all the listeners. So just as I found, as these prototypes are getting complexity, using some type of, these are really, which following like an event pattern. Event has happened, people subscribe, and the event has happened, people get notifications. It's like a messaging system. So it's like everyone has like a text message sent out to them. And some don't even care. Some get text messages dealing with containers saying, I'm a button. I don't care anything about the containers. Well, don't do anything. And you'll see that later in their code. Now, static, protected, bubble sort level. So there's a variable of type bubble sort level. Static means it's a variable that is shared by all the objects coming from listener. So they all share the same variable. So technically, only the first of these scripts that become awake, this level will be null because they all share the same level variable because it's static. So only the one goes out, the first one of these, at whichever order they get processed through, I have no idea. Doesn't matter because the first one will say, oh, well, I'm awake and this variable is null. I better go out and find the game controller so I can go get the bubble sort level object because I want to listen to it because this thing is going to send all the messages which are going to change everything happening in the game. All right, so that's why it's static. And protected, just so you're aware, variables can be public, private, protected. I'm sure there's other states, but public means objects from outside of this object can come in and call that method, or they can call that, change that variable. If it's private, only objects within that class can do it. And if it's protected, only objects that are within this class of listener, and only its inherited classes. So that's why it's protected, because it's one of these inherited classes that'll wake up first and end up setting this, because they all inherit this awake method. So that's why it's protected, because its inherited classes will eventually change this. And as I've been building up the experience, just I realized, oh, there's buttons and there's containers and there's tasks to be successful and unsuccessful, and that's where all these like methods were coming from. And I'll come through them one by one. I think the most important is like set listener state. So bubble sort level ends up calling this on all of them. So let me just kind of move through the code and just hold on to that information because I just have to explain a few more things and hopefully this all clicks together. So again, it's okay if this doesn't make any sense. So when I was going through learning all this, I had to hear this explained to me in many different ways in many different computer languages before it started to sink in. So if this is, it's okay if this doesn't make any sense. That's why you're following along with me. Also, if this doesn't make any sense and you're doing your own project, that's okay too, because there's a million different ways. If you know a way to execute on code and it's not this, do your way. It's if things are functioning, it's good. I'm good with it. So anyway, that's why we have a list or a collection of listeners, because later on I'm gonna add to the list. I don't think I'm gonna remove anything, but I'm definitely gonna add, and I'm gonna call everybody I know on the list. I'm gonna start calling that set listener state. So the next thing I want to talk about is this. This is probably new to you. Public bubble sort state, current state. And as I hover over it, it says it's an enum. So I don't know where I declared it. So I'm gonna open it up. Oh, it's its own script. I'm gonna bring this over. So bubble sort state. It's another script I created. And I'm sure that somewhere in here, yeah, it's right there, bubble sort state. So bubble sort state. Notice it's just a big list of terms, and it's an enumeration. So it's like an enumeration is a variable that kind of, if you look at it, you almost declare it, and it looks almost something like a class. And enumerations are very useful, and it's like making your own customized list. So if I move through it, notice as I move through it, that's equals 1. This equals 0, 1. This is 2. That's 3. That's 4. Notice that the names are very descriptive, and the names relate to all the different parts of my level. So as I tried to make them as discrete and chopped up the experience as like logically as I could, that like I need to know when we're in this phase, because I'm interested in changing the table, changing the camera, changing the containers at different states of our stages of the level. And that's what made me come up with this naming convention for the enumeration. So the useful thing with this is that we're going to use these to go into switch statements, some type of decisions structure. It could be an if-else. It could be for enumerations. I find it useful to just make them in switch statements, which I'll cover. And notice that these names should, like if you read through them, they're like chapters in a book. There's like a sequence of events. Things seem very much in a sense like you need. I'm introducing all the concepts. Remember, as I showed you, these are actually, each of these are learning objectives, either dealing with how to interact with the experience or dealing with what to learn from what I'm trying to teach you. But ultimately, this is like the tutorial. And then once you do the tutorial, here's task 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I started going into like level 2 type stuff, and I stopped here. But you do the task, and then we check if it's complete, and then we move on to the next one, and so on. So for me, enumerations are really useful because I don't want to just say like, oh, if we're at part 8 of the experience, do this, this, and this. Because 8, I'm like, wait a minute, what's 8? I got to remember this. I don't have to. Because an enumeration is what's called like a mapping from a human legible string to a machine legible integer. So the humans prefer the strings, the machines prefer numerals or bits or what have you, but integers, right? So I can remember very easy to remember strings when writing my code, and it just translates very nicely to just an iterated number. And you'll see that this becomes very useful. So this is almost like the core sequence of events in my experience. And when you later on, when I connect up the tutorial in level 1, I could just set the enum in the whole state, the whole level transfers to that part. So actually making a tutorial in the level 1 is just setting where am I in this enum state, this list of enumerations. Anyway, it's made as a separate script. Notice it doesn't inherit anything. It's just and it's not a class. It's an enum, or enumeration. And it's just long. So sometimes you just want to make it in its own separate file and you can reference it because it's public. So that's what this public bubble sort state, if you look over here, it's an enum called bubble sort state. So I'm saying now I want to create my own instance of this enum, this enumeration called bubble sort state, and I'm going to call it current state because I can set it to whatever I want. So this is it's a weird, it's almost like the syntax, the way to write about enumeration is a weird mixture of what you're used to with variables and then what you're getting used to with classes. So it's a data type of enumeration, specifically called bubble sort state, and this is the details of it. And I want to create an instance of it, and I'm calling it current state. It is the current state of my application, and I can set it to any of these. This is just like the master list, the blueprint of a bubble sort state. Now I want to create an instance of it because I'm going to use it and move through that so I know where I am. And then last is a public float, a reset timer that I must be using timer somewhere, which we'll get into. But that's why when we come out here, we see it does. I also did this for testing because as you move through this, I'm like, I don't want to keep doing all these steps to test here. I just want to jump to here. So I can just click, we're going to start here, click play, and notice we're moving into the state, the level, not the tutorial. And if I unclick here and I jump back to here in the current state enumeration, we're in the tutorial. So that's also for quick testing. And now that you saw me do that, that's actually what I'm doing. I'm just going to duplicate this thing out into the two levels and just set which enumeration are at. But the only reason it's super easy and super fast to do it now is because I spent a lot of time designing and building this so that it's quick for testing. I'm going to stop the video here because it's getting on to 30 minutes, and I'm going to continue on with the bubble sort level script.